Welcome to the Campus Outreach Staffcast, a podcast produced by CO staff for CO staff. I am your host, John Elam, and with me is the Campus Outreach Serve Executive Director, Kent Bailey. Ready for our conversation today, Kent?
I'm really looking forward to it, John. Thanks.
Great. Today we are welcoming two guests, James Broadaway and Stephen Murray, joining us from Cape Town, South Africa. Kent, will you please introduce them both to the Staffcast listeners?
Stephen and James, it is a great pleasure to have you guys here, and just been looking forward to the opportunity to hear about what God is doing there. An exciting new work in the campus outreach world, but God's been at work there for a long time, so we're eager to hear about all of that. And thanks for taking time out to be with us today.
You're welcome. Great to be with you guys.
Yeah,
Great
to be here.
Good. Well, we love to start these times, as always, kind of in campus outreach fashion, which is love to hear about you, a bit about your history, your family, and then we'll get into kind of your faith story in just a minute.
So I am born and bred South African, married to Robin for 16 years. Last week actually was our anniversary.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. And two kids, 12-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. And I have been the pastor of what is now called the Union Chapel, but it had a different name and it had a different life previous to this for almost 12 years now. So it was a church we planted, but it's had some mergers since then, which has made it complicated for me to explain to people exactly why the name's not the same as the church that I planted 12 years ago.
We'll get into that
Yes, I've been in there for the
great.
last 12 years, was involved in ministry in other churches before that, mainly in Cape Town, although I grew up on the East Coast in the city of Durban, and I surf central in South Africa. So I am a surfer.
That's right.
When time allows and fitness allows, I am a surfer. And so I don't do a ton of it now, but I have aspirations to be a more consistent surfer again in the future.
Very good.
So James Broadaway, I'm married to Kelly. We've been married for 20 years. We have 3 boys. We have been on staff for those entire 20 years. Came on staff right out of university. We got married and then joined the staff team. Yeah, and leading the campus outreach team here in Cape Town for a couple of years now, and really enjoying it, enjoying the partnership with the local church and learning lots, and amazed at how much I learn all the time. Think I know something and then find out that's not exactly what I thought it was. So it's a joy to do the ministry here.
A lifelong learner. That's awesome, James. That is great.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we all need to be. Well, we'd love to hear your faith story, how you came to know Christ, and maybe some high points of spiritual growth for you.
So I grew up in a really good Christian home. Both parents were believers. My dad passed away when I was really young, but he was a believer before that. And my earliest memories of going to church. And we were in a great little church that taught the Bible clearly. But I went through something of a rebellious phase in high school and basically felt I was too cool for church. Went away from the church for a while, came back to faith in first year university. Although at the time of the university I was on, there was, from what I could see, zero campus ministry going on where I was. And so it was actually had nothing to do with the university experience itself, but just through some sort of existential crisis, really. Ended up back at my same church, and all the gospel truths that I had been taught as a child, just this time, the lights came on. And I was like, yeah, that is the truth. And that's what I should be doing. And within a year, I was helping out with the teenage ministry at the church and just wanting to get involved in kind of vocational church ministry.
That's awesome. James?
Yeah, so I was part of a family that lived in Saudi Arabia for most of primary school years. My dad was a military contractor. He'd retired from the military before I was born and then took up a contracting job. And in Saudi Arabia, there's no visible churches, obviously. And when we visit the U.S., or we lived in the U.S. for a few years in between there in primary school, I wouldn't say we were super regular church attenders. As far as my memory serves, we were irregular in the sense I would push back against going to church, even as a youth. I felt like Sunday morning it's a quarter of my weekend and it's a quarter of me having fun and a good time. And so I remember when we went back to Saudi Arabia later in primary school, that one of the benefits that I enjoyed was I didn't have to go to church. I didn't have to seemingly waste a quarter of my weekend. And then under circumstances that we didn't choose, the company decision, we had to leave the country quickly. And we were back in the US in the state of Florida. My grandparents had been going to a church that we began to attend with them, and just became a regular part of our life, weekly church attendance. It was by all means, a good church, good community. I wouldn't say it was overly strong on teaching and discipleship, but people were genuine. They loved and cared for other people. And I remember then, and when I was 12 and 13, I just started reading the Bible by myself. I actually had a couple of sessions with the pastor where I initiated reading the Bible with him, and kind of culminated together for me when I was 14 years old, between grade 8 and grade 9. I was on a youth retreat, and this person, they didn't share the gospel. They just shared a very simple testimony about how they would not have considered themselves a Christian, and now they would. And it really was the first time in my life I felt a conviction from the Holy Spirit. I remember leaving the group. I was in tears, walked down the beach by myself, got down in the sand and started praying to God out loud, which I don't think I'd ever done before. And I just said, God, I don't know you. I want to know you, and you can do whatever you want with my life. And I think what was out of that season, because I went to a church and lived in a church culture that just didn't have a lot of Christianese that was prevalent in the 90s, things like testimony, conversion, those things were just, they weren't words that were flippantly thrown around. I didn't have very much to hang my experience on. And in some ways that can be confusing, but other ways it really pushed me to go to God's word and to just what's happened to me. I just knew that my desires changed pretty radically between 8th and 9th grade. I got to 9th grade and people in high school just said, you just seem like a different person. And I didn't have the handles to say, well, let me share the gospel with you. Let me share about what God's done in my life. It was just, I feel different. I'm not sure what's happened. And then God was really faithful to give opportunities for me to grow through high school and then into university. Even some high points there would be, went to university not with the intention to kind of go wild and find myself, but I remember distinctly going to university thinking, I really want to follow Jesus closely, and I just want to grow as a Christian. And with that, during my senior year of high school, I had actually met some guys from the university that I was going to attend, Elon University, that were involved with campus outreach. And I became roommates with one of them during my freshman year. He was a sophomore. So immediately kind of was in the campus outreach circles. That's how I initially got connected to campus outreach. And
it's great. Well, Stephen, I want to go back to something that you referenced earlier, because both of you have been clearly leading and laboring and serving fruitfully now for quite a number of years. And so I'd love to hear from each of you, when did that general idea of the Great Commission and of ministry become like, no, that's my thing. That is God's plan for me personally. Just that sense of calling for each of you. And then what has enabled you to serve with such longevity? There's so many people today talking about discouragement and the issues and challenges in that. So what has enabled you guys to continue to labor, to lead, and just to be fruitful for quite a number of years? So I'd love to hear both of those from each of you.
Yeah, it's a great question. In that first year when I was coming back to faith, it was quite a whirlwind. I was involved in like a really heavy party scene in Durban at the time, and I didn't have the theological resources and the practical resources to go, well, how do I now exit this lifestyle? So I just did a very, very clean break. In some ways, they were not that helpful because I alienated a lot of my non-Christian friends that I wish I had kept up relationships with. But I just dived into the church. And so I was at every single church meeting. And the longer you're just in those meetings, the more you're starting to go, well, I could do that. I could help there. And that just started solidifying more and more and more and more. And by the end of that year, there was only one direction. It was just patently clear. The young couple who were running this teenage ministry were just giving me more and more responsibility. The interesting thing was because I had the good grounding in the Sunday school, I had all the Bible knowledge, and it just kind of all clicked together in that year. So I could run Bible studies. I knew what was in the text and do that sort of stuff really quickly. And the church itself was going through some transitions. They needed somebody to look after the youth. And so there were providentially opportunities there to step into straight away in the coming years. I did have a moment at a really big conference where they were calling for people to commit to full-time Christian ministry. And I sat there. And up until that point, I'd been involved, but I was originally planning to be a sports journalist.
Oh, great.
So I figured I'm not good enough to play soccer in the English Premier League, but maybe I can write about it and get paid money to watch games and write about it. So that was the plan. And that was still the plan for most of that first year. And then something just clicked at the end of that year. And it's like, well, maybe Christian ministry is a full-time option for me. And that conference really clarified at that moment. So that was it. And then it was just confirmed by people, by opportunities, by numerous different avenues over the next few years. So I didn't straight away leave and go to seminary. I actually worked in the church for a number of years and then retroactively went back to seminary to do theological studies. So I had a fair bit of practical ministry experience under the belt before I went to do theological studies. And that helped to confirm a lot of stuff.
That's great.
In terms of the longevity, maybe in some ways I'm just a sucker for punishment. So I just keep going. I mean, what else am I going to do? So there is probably a little bit of a fatalistic part of it to me in that sense. I think I've been blessed with an incredible wife who's understood what it is we're trying to do together. We have such a good meeting of minds on that has made the difficult stuff that much more easy to do. To come home to her and have that togetherness is really, really helpful. And we've been through difficult patches, really, really difficult patches. But I think there are central convictions that we hold dear, that the gospel needs to go out, that the preached word will transform people, that it's not all very showy and your name and lights and you're getting to speak in front of large crowds and all that sort of stuff. Most of it is very ordinary, very plain work. And we had a couple of missteps in ministry early on that also kicked some of that unhealthy ambition out of us. In hindsight, I'm very grateful for, because I think I would have made many mistakes down the line that could have shipwrecked ministry had that not happened to us at the beginning.
That's great. James?
Yeah, so I think some of my understanding of calling actually happened at conversion, that I kind of felt like what God was doing, or what it seemed like he was doing after I came to faith, was I always wondered in high school, am I going to go into ministry? Actually interned at a church my senior year of high school, coordinated Bible studies at my high school. So did those kind of things early on. And then when I was in university, just taking opportunities to grow. I remember going on my first summer beach project and the sense of the Great Commission becoming something that's so tangible to me and not just something that's out there. One of my friends, Marco Lamer, was in South Africa on his cross-cultural project. He had been discipling me the previous year. And I just remember looking out at the Atlantic Ocean, thinking, I know people there. And it just made the Great Commission very tangible, very real for me in a personal way, that I'm personally connected to it. And then in university, starting Bible studies, taking opportunities as they come my way. Some of my Bible studies that started on residence halls, dorms, were successful, some were not. I also earned a philosophy degree. I feel like my philosophy degree was basically a 4-year experience of learning how to share the gospel with the most difficult crowd you could think of. And honestly, as my time with Campus Outreach really helped me learn how to share the gospel with really challenging people that have really seemingly objective, rational reasons for not accepting Christianity. And so that was an experience as well that kind of was like, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy speaking about things of faith with non-believers, and particularly people that bring real challenge to the faith. And then in 2003, I was able to participate on a cross-cultural project to Johannesburg. And it was my first kind of go at 6 weeks of student ministry. I enjoyed it. And from that point, I just remember going back and speaking with my staff in Charlotte, North Carolina, and asking, could I be considered to join the Campus Arch staff team? And the doors that kind of were open to me were ministry doors. There were some business connections. I mean, you can imagine with a philosophy degree, it's not like so many companies are just knocking on the door, asking you to come work for them. You probably need more education or more experience. But I had several ministry options open to me, and took the one that was most close to home and I had the most relationships in. That was Campus Outreach. And then in terms of enduring, I think much the same. Like, when people ask me that, I kind of wish I had a better answer, but I feel like it's almost a sense of after Jesus feeds the 5,000, then all the disciples, people walk away and Jesus looks at his disciples and goes, what about you guys? And Peter goes, where else are we going to go? You have the words of eternal life. I mean, I don't have any other options. And that's not to say I don't have other options of things I couldn't do business-wise. I think I could do lots of other things for vocation, but I just have a sense of where else am I going to go? Why would I do anything else? This is so important. And then with Kelly as well, one of my good friends, I remember him saying, I think Kelly might be the bravest person I know.
No doubt.
Because when she makes a decision, she fully feels everything in the future about how that's going to play out. Whereas I think most of the rest of us, if we just finished watching Band of Brothers as a family, and I think you told me about D-Day, I'm going to cognitively just go, okay, D-Day, it's going to be bad. I'll feel everything I need to feel when I'm on the beach or when I'm jumping out of the plane. I think the moment Kelly decides to join the airborne in this analogy, she's already at D-Day, but she's still like, yeah, I'm in, I'm good.
Wow.
And so, yeah, owing a lot to her with her endurance in ministry as well.
Great testimony of wonderful women in both of your lives. That's awesome. That is so great. Stephen, we'd love to hear more of the Union Chapel story and how you came to that. Even the vision there for both for planting and revitalization that are so critical. So we'd love to hear about all that.
Yeah. So in 2013, we set out with a core team. Well, a tiny percentage of a core team. It was more like a parachute church plant than an actual core team. We had a couple of families. And I had worked on the staff of a church in the northern suburbs of Cape Town, which is kind of like the Bible Belt of Cape Town. But during that entire time, my wife and I had been living in the city center in the downtown of Cape Town, which is probably the most ideologically progressive part of the entire African continent. And we'd always had a heart to see some ministry done there. And we knew a lot of people. There were some churches in the area, but not a lot. A lot of dying mainline churches, not a ton happening in the area, very low percentage of the population, of the residential population in the area going to church on a Sunday morning. But while I worked for this church out in the northern suburbs, the pastor there initially said, well, why don't you start a Bible study with some of the people you're meeting and connecting with? So we did that in our apartment. That grew, and then in 2013, we started services in the area. We were very influenced by Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. So my wife and I had an opportunity to go and spend some time there doing church planter training with Tim Keller and the staff there. And we just had some wonderful times there. We had a good relationship with them. And we were thinking, how could we plant, not Redeemer Cape Town, but a church in Cape Town that speaks to secular, skeptical people. And that's what we drove it. It was a tiny little church plant for a number of years. It was a glorified Bible study. It was really hard. It's a very transient community. People live there for 3 years out of university in their first job, and then they move out because they can't afford to stay there. The only people who can afford to stay there long term are uber wealthy folk who are basically like an unreached people group. They don't go near the church. So we were mainly working with the young professionals who were coming in, but with a very high turnover. So we'd get like 30 new people to the church in a year, but 25 of them would leave at the end of the year for work opportunities in Johannesburg, which is the financial hub, or overseas to London or Sydney. And so it was really tough going in those early years. What happened providentially was we were constantly moving venues. Venues were really expensive. We were in 3 different venues when we felt the need to find a bigger venue that was cheaper. Because we were in a beautiful art gallery at one point. It was wonderful, but we were paying by the hour. It was incredibly expensive, and it wasn't quite big enough for where we were at. And so we knew about a church that had a big hall next to their church building that they were open to renting out. We built a relationship with them. They agreed to take us on board, and we moved in there about 2 or 3 weeks before COVID hit.
Oh, wow.
And everything came to a standstill. But over the period of the lockdown, and we had a pretty severe lockdown in South Africa in terms of the regulations on worship. Over that time, though, I built a friendship with the pastor of the church who was semi-retired. He was looking after this old mainline church. And he was saying to me, look, Stephen, I don't know if this church is going to come back from COVID. At the time, they had 20 formal members, of about 10 of which were actually coming to church on a Sunday, but a beautiful old building in the downtown. And so when they started to open up for services again, he said, well, why don't you move into the main sanctuary of the church, and we'll let you know when we're ready to come back, because the congregation was very aged. We were afraid of coming back to worship services. So we started meeting in the main building, and him and I kept talking. And I said, well, why don't you invite who is prepared to come back to come and worship with us? And let's see how that goes for a while. So a handful of them started coming and worshiping with us. And then we entered a formal conversation with those remaining members and said, what about a merger? And they, at the end of the day, voted unanimously for the merger. We read up all the details of it. It was really them joining us. But what we actually functionally ended up doing was dissolving our church plant and all of our members moving over to their church for the historic reason, and then reconstituting their church according to our policies and things. It was in that way, it keeps the legacy of the church going. It's a 212-year-old church. It was the first non-conformist church in the Cape Colony in South Africa during the colonial period. And so it had this legacy. Famous London Missionary Society missionaries had been there. David Livingstone had used it as his base. Wow. We've got his desk in the church on the stage there. It's one of our religious artifacts. Because it felt like they were giving up the most from their side, we changed the name to the Union Chapel, which was the historic name of the church back in the early 1800s. And so we restored that historic name. So we're both 12 years old and 212 years old as a church. We actually put the established in 1813 under our logo, just to give us a little bit of street cred.
That's right.
But it's been a fantastic story. Most of that congregation are not there anymore now because they've moved far away from the city. So there's probably about 2 or 3 of them that still come on a Sunday morning now. But they left happy that the church had been handed over in a good way and the ministry was continuing. And so we're just grateful to the Lord for his providence in bringing this all together. The street that we're on is in the middle of the restaurant district in the downtown. And if you had told me 12 years ago, Stephen, where would you love to have a church? If the map was a blank canvas, I would have put it exactly where we are right now. And so it's just an incredible kindness of the Lord to put us in this place. And we've already seen the benefit of just being in an established church building. We get walk-ins all the time now who are joining the church, who've just seen activity happening there from the community. And it's just been a massive blessing.
That is awesome. I want to come back to more of that in just a moment. But
yeah, James, we'd love for you to share a little bit about your process on staff. Eventually, as even we first met, we were both resource directors. I was in Brazil, you were in Charlotte. And just your process of your connection to South Africa and what got you to where we meet you now, which is the team leader there in Cape Town.
Yeah, sure. I've had a lot of different roles on staff, and I was first hired to run our in-house collegiate ministry at Christ Covenant, and that changed to, we want you to investigate a new campus in Charlotte, North Carolina. I did that the first year on staff. Really enjoyed it. Didn't know what I was doing. It's funny that my very first gig was investigating a new campus, and really enjoyed it. And now I'm leading a region and investigating, pioneering a region. So I worked on campus for 3 years directly, 2004 to 2007. And then from 2007, I moved into the resource director role. Well, let me back up a little bit. In 2002, the Charlotte region had sent out staff to start the Johannesburg region. So there was this historic connection between Charlotte and Johannesburg, South Africa. We shared a board at Charlotte. Christ Covenant was a shared sending church. There were lots of relationships. I was a student when the staff left, so I knew lots of the staff. We sent CCPs there. So we had this close connection. I was processing Johannesburg gifts and funds that came in through the Charlotte office. So you're seeing gifts, you're praying for people, you're sending emails, you're resourcing them, helping them out. So I did that from 2007. And then I remember in 2012, we just began to get more resource staff, and I was projecting to move to a different role organizationally. But one of the things we began to pray for was we knew there was a significant resourcing shortage globally, and that's a high need for teams. Let's begin to pray that God would raise up resource staff from our Charlotte region that could go someplace else in the world to help support those teams. That was something we began to pray. And it's a prayer you're praying, not thinking, I'm the one who's going to do this. I'm thinking, I'm praying this for someone else. Not that I'm opposed to going. I just had other plans. We just had our third kid. Let me finish seminary. Maybe when our youngest is 3-4 years old, we'll think about moving overseas. And then in 2014, we had a board meeting. Pete Ketterman got on the phone from South Africa and said, I think somewhere in the next season, we're going to need to leave. Our family will need to leave South Africa. It wasn't urgent. He just wanted to bring the board into his thinking. And then Pete gets off the call, and the board basically, for the next 20 minutes, just talking about it, a brief conversation, probably used my name 20 times. Meaning, what South Africa really needs is someone like James who he can do the resourcing stuff, but he really gets vision and organizational leadership. And he does student ministry as well. It's like he's just not a resource guy. He just can kind of do a lot of different things. And that sounds like the kind of person they need in South Africa to help supplement the team and care for the team. And so the board's making these comments, and none of them are thinking, no one's had a conversation with Pete. None of them are backdooring me to convince me to move to South Africa. You're the type of person that they would need. And as they're having this conversation, Andrew Holbrook, my current boss and regional director for Charlotte, is across the boardroom from me, kind of making eyes at me. And we have the board meeting. We let everyone leave. And he looks at me and he goes, "So, what do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's not what I was thinking when I walked in the room tonight."
Right.
I'm definitely open to praying about it and considering if we would move, if I'm the right fit. And there's a lot of questions I have. First, let me go home and talk to Kelly. And so fortunately, I got home late enough that night from the board meeting. She was already asleep, so I didn't have to have that conversation that night. And then next afternoon, when I got back from our office, I said, "Hey, this happened last night. What do you think about this?" And I think, I don't know how much time went by. It might have been that night or the next morning. She said, "Let's do it. Let's move to South Africa." And we had been on a CCP in 2000. We led a CCP in 2007. She loved it. She was ready to stay. And then the next night was Valentine's Day. And as a very romantic gesture, we had a double date with Kent and Joe Bailey on whatever platform, or FaceTime or whatever platform we were using in 2014. So Valentine's Day 2014, we talked with Kent and Joe about moving overseas and asked them about their experience with kids. And then we just kind of began to move forward and talk to the team in South Africa, took a trip. And I'd already been to South Africa 5 or 6 times on setup trips with cross-cultural projects. So we knew a lot about South Africa, but at that point, it was more learning more about the team and church connections and those kind of things. So that's how I ended up in South Africa from resource director. And I took over as a resource director in South Africa, did that from 2015 through 2020, and then transitioned out from there to begin to prepare for starting a region in Cape Town.
Awesome. Stephen, I know that even as the pastor there at Union Chapel, you have had both a huge vision for, but also a great involvement in broader church planting and leading that in many, many ways. I'd love for you to give us more of just your insight around the church planting needs, both there in South Africa, even more broadly than that. I know you're connecting to people all over. Take us inside what you see and what are the needs there that you're really seeking to lead toward and to meet in the years ahead.
I really drank the Tim Keller Kool-Aid in a big way early on in ministry, and his conviction that the best way to do evangelism is through extensive church planting, and not just for the churches that are planted, but even for existing churches in terms of the renewal of existing churches and denominations. And I'm still fully committed to that idea because I've seen it work. And so after several travels around the US and spending time with the folk at Redeemer and at some other churches in the Presbyterian Church in America, came back and the idea was to plant, but it was never just to plant and then sit back and go, well, we've got a little community now, self-sustaining, it's doing well, that's it. It was always to plant a church that will be a church planting church.
Yes.
And so we put that on the radar with our congregation from when they were a core team in our living room. That has been a thing we've trumpeted week in and week out. And so actually, as we've planted in the future, it's been a really easy sell to our congregation because it's just in the DNA of who they are. That I think the people who've been around our church for a long time would think it's strange if they were in a church that wasn't planting regularly. Like, why wouldn't you be planting regularly? But it's hard to plant when you're a small church yourself. So at the beginning, we had these ideals, but we were like, well, how do you actually pull this off? We are small. We don't have big core teams to be able to send out. We don't have funding to be able to sustain a church planter and his family on the field. And in the Lord's providence, we continue to build our relationship with PCA churches. And we saw a very strategic need, and this was theological convictions as well, was that there really isn't a theologically conservative Presbyterian denomination in South Africa. I mean, in the US, you've got, about 5 or 6 different options. And there's just nothing like that in South Africa. They were during the colonial times and earlier on in the history, but that had fallen into liberalism. And so now there just wasn't an option. And folk in the PCA had said, hey, you should really think about starting a new denomination there. And I had always thought, well, that sounds fantastic, but how do you actually do it? Our sending church that sent us out was a church that had broken away from the main line. They were out in the northern suburbs, and there were just two of us, two little churches. We were the only Presbyterians we knew of in a country of 60 million people now. And so the idea was nice, but we had no way of actualizing it until the Lord in his providence just seemed to bring a bunch of different things together in the year or so before COVID. And that was, we had guys who were South Africans who had studied overseas in the US, came back and wanted to plant, and they wanted to network with us. Mission to the World, the missions agency of the PCA, started saying, hey, we really need to think more about church planting in the Southern African region. And so we set up a funding board that looked specifically at funding church planting, theological education, student ministry, those three areas. I still sit on that board at the moment. And so we started partnering PCA churches with work on the ground here. And at the same time, we started getting young guys coming to us saying, hey, we want to plant. And so in the Lord's providence, we've gone from 2 churches to now I think we have 7 churches right now. And we have 4 church plants in the pipeline for the next 12 months or so. And I'm sitting right now with an inbox that has messages from people contacting me to find out more about what we're doing in church planting. Are there any opportunities? So I've almost got too many options to chase down at the moment. So I currently chair our church planting committee in our little growing denomination. So I spend a lot of my time doing training with the church planters and then recruiting church planters as well. And I love it. It's been fantastic. We've been able to directly plant 2 churches out of our church. One of them is right by the University of Cape Town, and which started services now maybe 2 months ago. So we're very encouraged by that. We've basically tried to hem in the university belt in Cape Town with churches here. Right. So we were strategically trying to get them close to campuses. And it's just been, I have to prick myself sometimes to realize this is what I get to do for a living, is both pastor a church and help guide and lead this fledgling church planting movement. And we've had incredible encouragement from our friends in the US. So Christ Covenant has been one of our cheerleading churches from day one when we planted 12 years ago. And the resources training we had from Redeemer City to City in the early days have really borne a lot of fruit here. I'm just riding the wave right now. Who knows how long it will last for? But I'm excited. There are challenges. We've been able to start a lot of churches. I think our next challenge will be to see now moving from starting to sustainability. There's a couple of our churches that are coming on the 3-4 year mark now that are in that phase where they're looking to move. So of our 7 churches, only 2 of them are what we would call established churches or particularized churches. The others are all in a kind of a mission church status. That's the next big challenge. Recruiting has turned out to be pretty easy. There have been plenty of guys wanting to put their hands up to come and plant. And even to some extent, finding funding for that has been, the Lord has provided. It's now the sustainability, because we believe South Africa can sustain its own ministry, and we don't want to be eternally dependent upon overseas donations. This is easily the most developed economy on the African continent, and it should be not just putting money back into Christian ministry in South Africa, but even beyond north of our border into the rest of Africa. And so we want to try and demonstrate that we can do that and build sustainable ministries here, but primarily through churches and church planting. So it's very exciting. It's nerve-wracking because that funding is pledged and it comes in at the 11th hour and it's the livelihoods of young guys, young families, a guy and his wife who are going out to go and plant a church. And so that I spend many sleepless nights waiting on relationships and partnerships that we've built, but it's been a fantastic experience.
This has been just part 1 of our conversation. Stay tuned and catch part 2 in the next week. Make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcasting service to get each new upcoming episode. The Campus Outreach Staffcast is a production of Campus Outreach Serve. The vision of Campus Outreach is to glorify God by building laborers on the campus for the lost world. To learn more, visit www.campusoutreach.org.